Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Enjoying some stereotypical summer activities.
Summer retired activities.
Played golf today. Went to a concert Sunday night.
Yep. I mean, is there anything more retired than going out and just playing 18 holes? Do you get 18 holes in or 9 holes in? What'd you end up doing?
I only played 9 holes today. I'm gonna play again tomorrow.
Retirement living it up. And, spend some time golfing, spend some time gardening. You just got to pick up fishing. That's all you got to do next.
Unfortunately, I do not have the curtains closed, and so the garden is staring at me right now and saying, "What are you doing? You
it's just getting
again.
Choked by weeds. It's
what are you
just
doing out of the
screaming
golf course?
for help.
Help us, please."
But anyway, we are here today as the preseason is kind of wrapping up. Today, we're going to talk a very little bit about the Packers' past preseason game against the Broncos. Not a whole lot to glean as the Packers sat 31 players. But we're going to talk a little bit about some of the players we were keeping an eye on. But then more importantly, we're going to go over, both of us each made our initial 53-man roster predictions. Now, next Tuesday, as we're recording Wednesday, so 6 days from when we're recording, probably 5 days from when you're listening to this, the actual 53-man rosters will be up. And so we'll be doing a podcast analyzing those moves. So today, for this podcast this week, we each thought it would be a good exercise for us to come to the table with 53-man roster predictions of our own, along with 16-man practice squad predictions. And instead of, comparing them and going over position by position, more so talking a little bit about what decisions we thought ended up being very difficult, what we learned about the roster when making these 53-man predictions, et cetera, and pretty much just our main takeaways from the exercise of building 53-man rosters out. I think we looked at it. Also, I looked at yours, you peeked at mine, and we only were like 3 players off different. So maybe 2 great minds think alike, or the opposite. I guess we'll see. But anyway.
There's lots of different kinds of minds that can think alike.
So we're going to talk a little bit about...
There's a lot of pairs out there.
So we're going to talk about the Denver Broncos game, and then we're going to talk a little bit about our takeaways from building our 53-man roster predictions before breaking down the rosters next week. Before we get into any of that, though, just wanted to pitch a couple of things. If you like what you hear here today, subscribe. Subscribe on Spotify, subscribe on Apple, subscribe on Amazon, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe everywhere, all 4. Go check. We would really appreciate it. Leave a comment. Let us know what you think. Tell us if, you agree with us. Tell us if you disagree with us. We just love to talk Packers with anyone who wants to chat with us. So come leave a comment, come subscribe, and then follow us on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out whenever we have new episodes out, stats from doing research for these episodes, articles and content from other Packers content creators that we think are good, updates on roster moves, injury reports, et cetera. One-stop shopping for everything Titletown. That's at FatherSonPacker on Twitter. And then tweet at us if you're not going to comment on YouTube or on Spotify, et cetera, come tweet at us on Twitter. So we'll get back to you because we love just chatting Packers with everyone in the Packers community. It's such an awesome community. It's the best fan base in sports, and we just love interacting with each and every one of you, or almost each and every one of you, but most of you. If you're listening to this, we probably enjoy interacting with you. But anyway, getting into the meat of it, Dad, before we start talking about either the Broncos catastrophe, we don't need to call that a game, and before we start talking about 53-man rosters, we do have a few pieces of Packers news to touch on. The first is some roster moves. The Packers have made 2 moves since we last talked. They added fullback Henry Pearson and cut running back Jarvian Howard. Now, Henry Pearson spent last year on the practice squad with the Packers, so there's some familiarity there. They actually had him in camp earlier this year and cut him, and now are adding him back. So some familiarity there. He's a, kind of fullback, kind of H-back type of player. Good blocker. Nothing super dynamic, but a solid player. And then also they made another move, which is a bit more complicated, but pretty much what they did was they took their kicker, Alex Hale, who has been the 3rd kicker on the roster, and they have actually now designated him as their International Pathway Program player. Now, he was a player who played in college in the States, but because he's Australian, he is still eligible for the IPP program. But that does mean they did cut Kenneth Odumegwu, which does kind of stink because he was a fun story. He was the first time playing football at an organized level was with the Packers last year. And it seemed like he was a bit of a locker room favorite. So hopefully he can catch on somewhere else. But it does seem like a bit of a prudent move, Dad, given the fact that they have some question marks at kicker, which we'll talk about. And it allows them to keep an extra player who is probably more likely to contribute, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, so Odumegwu, he had some nice athleticism, made a play every once in a while, but there's just so many people in front of him. The chance of him ever getting onto an active roster for the Packers So maybe he'll be able to catch on somewhere else where there's not so much depth in front of him. And any trick the Packers can use to have more kickers develop
is a good one.
Is a good one.
Yeah.
Can we get some quarterbacks on that too?
I was going to say, yeah, but it seems like a prudent move. Obviously stinks that, they're losing Odemegwu. But it is what it is, and it makes sense. It's very pragmatic of them. Moving on, though, past those roster moves, one other piece of news is an injury report. And so these players were out as of practice on August 21st, Wednesday as we're recording. So Packers have added actually a few players to this list. These players are A.J. Dillon, who is out with a stinger. Andre Dillard, who is out with a shoulder injury, although per Rob Domofsky, that is not supposed to be too serious, so something to keep in mind there. Tyler Davis, out with a shoulder injury. Spencer Wagee, out with a concussion, and then Marshawn Lloyd, out with a hamstring. He's been out for a little while now, since the first preseason game. So he's not a new addition, but those other four are. A notable return, though, was Edgerrin Cooper is back to doing individual drills after missing several weeks with a hip injury. Pretty good for him because, second-round pick, hasn't played as much traditional linebacker at Texas A&M. It was more of a, quarterback spy, sprint and go get the ball. So it's good for his development to get back out there and maybe hopefully get one preseason game under his belt, although it does seem like maybe that might be a bit of a stretch given the fact that he's just doing individuals now and we're only a few days away from that game. Dad, any thoughts on that injury report? Any, takeaways there, or should we move on to talking a little bit about the Broncos game? Because we do need to touch on it at least a little bit, unfortunately.
Yeah, so there are a couple things that's also related a little bit to the Broncos game. Is if Dillon was out with an injury, that totally changes the way I was thinking about that, him sitting out. With him, if he was a healthy scratch like, then he's a guaranteed roster spot. And if he's injured, well, that completely changes the conclusion from there. Yeah,
because essentially what we had been talking about prior to this was, like you were saying, A.J. Dillon was not dressed for the game on Sunday against the Broncos, and everyone was pretty much saying, so he's going to make the roster then, because they sat all their other starters, and the takeaway was they must think of him similarly to them. But given the fact that it is a stinger, and actually Matt LaFleur said today that they're trying to be cautious with that because if you remember, he missed the end of last year with a stinger. That was the issue that plagued him then. Unclear if it's the same side or how related they are. But they're being cautious apparently with him. And I think that does kind of, we'll talk about when we talk about our takeaways from the 53-man roster prediction, but it does kind of color the way I'm looking at that running back room and how they're going to navigate keeping who they want to keep, given the fact that both Dillon and Lloyd are a little bit dinged up right now.
Yeah. And so that's right. With the two of what we may have been thinking were the top three, both being hurt for we don't know how long at this point. That's, got to figure something out quick. The other thing is, you talked about, said Dillard's shoulder injuries, and so doesn't seem so serious. Have there been any kind of comments like that about Tyler Davis's that you've seen?
Not that I have seen. And I'm pretty, reloading Twitter all the time, so I probably would have seen it if there was, but I did not see it. It's possible there is something out there, but I did not see it.
Yeah, and I'm very excited about Edgerrin Cooper getting back into practice.
Yes.
Try to get something in these next couple weeks, as many reps as possible to get ready for the season, because we are hoping to see him play a lot of snaps this year.
Yeah, and hopefully, at this point, I think him starting week one is probably out of the picture, but maybe after a few weeks, sometimes these problems, not solve themselves, but injuries force players to start starting. Knock on wood, that doesn't happen, but it is football. It is a violent game. But hopefully, he can prove enough in practice after a few weeks where he can maybe become a part-time player and then maybe become a starter, because I think obviously his ceiling is higher than, Wilson's and McDuffie's, and hopefully he can, get to that place where he's a contributor this year still, despite missing chunk of camp.
Yeah, it's always rough when rookies miss a lot of camp. It was kind of like DeBose last year. He got hurt, missed camp, and never really got traction. Now, he had a lot more players in front of him.
And it's also different, a seventh-round pick versus a second-round pick, to be fair.
Right.
But yeah, any other takeaways on that injury report, or should we blaze through this Broncos game? Because I don't think we want to talk about it very long.
With a flamethrower.
Yeah. Okay. So this Broncos game on Sunday night was a 27-2, nasty, gross, disgusting, unwatchable, filthy, yucky, any other adjective you want to use game. I don't know if 27-2 is a scoregami. I don't know if they keep scoregamis, but that's like the only interesting thing that really came out of it. I think we each had 2 takeaways though.
Just one thing is, just saw somebody tweeted, and I can't remember who it was, that in regular season Packers had 2 games where they've scored 2 points, and they are in their history, and they are 1-1 in those games.
And you told me about that. I was like, that's some 1930s football, baby. That's some 2-0 real.
The Packers were just having a retro game.
I mean, someone should have told the Broncos, because the Packers were throwing some 1930s, 1940s offense out there, and the Broncos were air raiding the crap out of us. But no, it was pretty bad. Keep in mind though, for this, the Broncos were playing their starters. The Packers were not. Broncos were playing their starters for most of the first quarter. The Packers sat 31 players, but it was still not great. It's a little interesting because Matt LaFleur did say post game he hoped the effort was better, and then on I think Monday or Tuesday he said he watched the film and he was like, no, the effort was good. He was like, actually watching the tape, he's like, I was actually pretty happy with the effort. There were just some mental mistakes that are going to happen, and obviously you don't want those, but he walked back his comments about the effort, because that followed them getting their butts kicked in the joint practice like 2 days prior, because they went to Denver.
The more disturbing thing is how badly the joint practice seemed to go by all reports.
Yeah, and I think Elton Jenkins, I think it was, I can't remember if it was him. One of the players made a comment about them kind of losing steam as the practice went, like possibly because of the altitude, which could happen. But at the same time, it's like, the Broncos are not projected to be a very good team, so you'd hope that the showing at joint... That's the thing. I was more concerned about the showing at joint practice than I was about the preseason game at all, because you had your starters for the joint practice, and you did not do anything. I mean, they had back-to-back, like, 2-minute drills. The first one, they went 4 and out and gained a yard, and then the next one, they got, like, 1 first down and then went turnover on downs again, and then Bo Nix just carved them up going the other way. I'm more concerned about the joint practice than I am about the actual preseason game, but we saw more during the preseason game, Dad, so let's just at least touch on a couple of things there. Do you want to start with your first takeaway from the preseason game? I think we each brought 2 things, because there weren't a lot of takeaways with so many players sitting and such a nasty game, but
I have a good and the bad. I squeezed in 2 short ones for the good. Should I do the good first? Probably.
Yeah, I mean, let's start with the good, I guess. All right, let's start with the bad and end with the good. Right. Let's start with the bad.
The player I had the bad was Tyler Davis. Had a very rough game.
Yeah.
I watched it. It's like, it seemed like there were a number of plays that were simply blown up because of bad blocking on his part. He had, according to PFF, the second lowest run blocking grade in PFF amongst all tight ends in the preseason.
I thought you were going to say, the way you loaded up to it, I thought you were going to say in PFF history, and I would have believed it, because it was pretty nasty.
It was a 37.2.
Yeah, that's pretty gross. For reference, an average is around a 60, and obviously PFF grades are not everything, but it matched what we were watching out there. It was not good.
And so that was his run blocking, and he wasn't credited with any pass blocking snaps, so we didn't get to see if he was better or the same.
This is why I'm team Ben Sims for third tight end. I think he's substantially better and has a higher ceiling. Whenever I watch Tyler Davis try and block, he looks like he's 210 pounds. I mean, no offense, but he just looks physically small whenever he tries to block someone. He looks just tiny compared to them.
I was hoping for more, because the reports in camp was that he was doing good, better in training camp and the practices, but
and also if he can give you something as a bit of a combo tight end H-back, then because he is a good special teams contributor, but he needs to give you something as the third tight end, on offense, at least a little bit.
Yeah, so that was rough, because I feel like a large number of the running plays just failed because of
poor blocking.
Poor blocking, including him. It seemed like Newman, and at the right tackle position.
Yeah, Glover started off okay, and then just started getting smoked around the edge once they figured out he couldn't handle their speed. It was a tough go on the right side. It was a tough go for Newman, a tough go for Davis. I don't think either of us actually have this year, but maybe we should touch on it for a second. What do you think of the quarterback play? I mean, it is a big storyline coming out of this game, and I realize neither of us actually picked it to talk about, but I feel like we should at least touch on it, right? It wasn't very good.
No, I mean, if we end up
having to play either of them, knock on wood, that doesn't happen. But
let's say we have 4 games there, or
I think you're praying for 1 and 3, after what we watched.
you don't need a backup to be a star, but you would like a backup to go like 2-2.
Yeah, just keep you
Not
afloat.
0-4.
Yeah.
The difference between 2-2 and 0-4 is making the wild card with your quarterback back, healthy, ready to go at the end of the season, or being left at home. Despite being now everybody's ready to go, and you could be one of the best teams because everybody's healthy, but you got eliminated because you went 0-4. That's the scenario you're trying to avoid.
And like the blocking wasn't great. There were some drops from the receivers. You know, DeBose had a couple of drops, but Clifford looked poor, and then everyone was calling like, "You got to put Pratt in. You got to put Pratt in." Pratt came in and was not much better. It wasn't good. It just wasn't good. And they put the ball in harm's way. You know, Clifford throwing up a pretty bad pick, and Pratt just fumbling off a strip sack. I know the guy's coming at you, but it's not like they're coming on your blind side. Like, he's coming straight at you. And I get that Glover got beat really quick, but you got to hold on to the ball. You can't be turning over.
Once like Clifford fumbled the ball,
the first snap of the game.
Very first snap of the game was about as inauspicious a start as you could get.
Yeah, we should have known at that point. But yeah, so I think the backup quarterback spot is, knock on wood that they never have to play, but it just is what it is in the NFL. I mean, there was some stat where it's like the most quarterbacks played by like week 8 last year ever in the NFL, like in terms of like number of backups needing to play. And that just is how it is, especially with like, new concussion protocols, stuff like that. It's just, these backups play a lot. And right now, I don't think anyone would feel super confident with either of them playing. Hopefully, they can show a little bit better in these joint practices this next week against the Ravens and the third preseason game. But I guess we'll just see. My takeaway, though, my negative was Greg Joseph. His pro was he got the only kick of the night, so maybe the coaching staff had him ahead of Carlson. But he shanked it. It was a 47-yarder at altitude, mind you, and he pushed that thing like wide right, like never had a chance. And then he followed that up by going 2 of 5 in the next practice. So he's had a really rough week and has, I think, completely lost the lead in this kicking competition. And
he's fallen behind after being ahead by 10 percentage points.
Yeah,
he's dropped from like 90 to 80.
He's like 79% now from over the course of camp. Yeah, he's behind Carlson now. Over the course of camp.
Like his last 2 weeks must be just terrible.
Abysmal. It's been really bad.
To drop that fast.
And Carlson's at like 80.3%. Joseph's at like 79%. For reference, if a kicker kicked 80% in the regular season last year, they would have been the 23rd ranked kicker in the league. That's pretty nasty. That's pretty bad. That's not the kind of kicker you want when your goal is to be competing in the playoffs and trying to be a contender. I don't know what they're going to do at that spot. There are some players that might become available, like Cade York of the Browns. I think Joey Sly might become available. There's some options there. They just made Alex Hale an IPP player. I don't know what they're going to do because I think that's probably the biggest weakness on the team right now is the kicker spot.
I think we're in a race between the kicker and the backup quarterback.
Yeah, but the kicker is, knock on wood. The kicker's going to matter more.
Hopefully.
Yeah, it's like, and you just saw last year, the season was derailed by a missed 40-yarder. And it's looking like it's going to be Carlson again, and he doesn't look like he's made some massive jump from year 1 to year 2.
No, his conversion percentage is almost identical. It's like unchanged. So far it seems like this is who he is, 80%.
Man. And the thing is, Crosby
was looking so good until 2 weeks ago, and he's just fallen off the rails.
Yeah, and Crosby was 80%, but he would make the big ones, like when you needed him to. And that's why the 80% was acceptable. And also, his misses were usually like, I'm going to miss 7 in one game, and then I'm going to be fine for the rest of them.
Detroit Lions, Cincinnati Bengals, like what percentage of his misses in those years were just from
just one game? I'm telling you, he'd miss he'd have one game a year or one game every couple of years where he'd miss 5 and like lose you the game. And obviously that would suck. But for the rest of the games,
that
he'd be
Bengals game, they ended up winning.
I know because
the Bengals matched them with a bunch of
that was such
four misses.
That was a messy game. That's a fun one. But anyway, yeah. So that was my negative for the day. Was just Joseph missing that one and then kind of falling apart down the stretch. The kicking competition is bad right now.
Maybe the thin air threw off Joseph. He was expecting more wind resistance as his ball went off to the right.
Yeah, he was expecting to just blow it way back in. Sure, I guess.
But slicing and slicing and slicing.
Yeah. But anyway, we've talked about some negatives. Tyler Davis, Royce Newman, the backup quarterbacks, and Greg Joseph. Dad, what was your positive takeaway from this game, though?
Okay, so I had 2 players. I'll start with Brenton Cox. I thought he looked pretty good. He made plays. He had 5 pressures in just 17 pass rush snaps against Denver. And he's now second in the league in the preseason with 8 pressures in the 2 games. And is 5th among players with at least 20 snaps and pressure rate at 15%. So he's putting some he's stacking success.
Yeah, and he was a player, I think there was a general amount of excitement about him, getting him as an UDFA last year, and then having him through the team. I mean, I think he's pretty cemented as the 5th edge rusher now. The question is just if they keep a 5th edge. But yeah, he had a nice day against the Broncos. My positives were that we finally got to see Tyron Hopper and Cutdown Oladapo, which is exciting. Oladapo had, a pretty nondescript day. For those of you who don't know, Cutdown Oladapo is a rookie safety out of Oregon State, who was a 5th rounder, I believe. And then Tyron Hopper was a 3rd round rookie middle linebacker out of Missouri. So some decent capital invested in them, and it's nice to finally see them. Oladapo had a pretty nondescript day. He showed the ability, though, to play, down in the box as a bigger safety. He's a larger safety than any of the other guys they have. Showed ability to take on some blocks, which is, always a good skill to have. It's a unique skill for a safety, and his size is unique for a safety. And, he had, I think, 1 target, didn't allow a catch, so that's good for him. Hopper was one who played a lot. He played almost the entire game, probably because Raylan Goforth sustained a concussion. But he played almost the whole game. And my main takeaway was, when he was coming downhill and dealing with stuff like in between the tackles, he looked pretty good, taking on blocks, lowering the hit stick, not allowing running backs to drive through him. I thought he looked really good. I think he had 8 solo tackles and 4 of them were stops, I believe. 4 or 5 of them were stops per PFF. So he was making stops to the line. He looked a little less comfortable playing in space, backpedaling. He looked kind of stiff, side to side. There was one play where the Broncos ran a pretty simple play action rollout, and he bit really hard on the play action fake, 7 steps out of where he was supposed to be. And they just threw it right
he goes
behind
to the
where
right.
left.
He goes to the right, and they're going to and 2 different receivers are running past him to the left.
Yeah, and
saw
so
that play.
It's his first action, it's his first real game action. So I'm not going to ding him too much for negative plays. They're going to happen. And he showed that he could contribute in certain ways. And, hopefully that, stiffness in the back pedal and his ability to play in space, he can, work from there. That was something he struggled a little bit with at Missouri. But one thing he struggled with at Missouri was his tackling. And he did not struggle with that in this game. He only had 1 missed tackle, I think, and it wasn't a super egregious miss. So that's at least good. The playing in space is obviously something he's going to need to work on. But Dad, what do you think about either Hopper or Oladapo watching this game? Did you have any takeaways there? Or
yeah, so looking at Hopper, you're right. He did have 4. He was credited with 4 stops, and that 1 missed tackle gave him a 9.1% missed tackle rate, which I would take 7 days out of 7 compared to his. I think it was 22.
Yeah, it was 20% at Mizzou.
So I feel like in general for the Packers players, if they're in single-digit percentage for missed tackle rate, that's really good.
Great. Especially when 4 of your tackles are stops at the line, that's a trade-off you'll make any day, even if you end up missing one. And he was involved in so many tackles that it's you miss one, it happens. But it was just exciting to see both of them on the field and showing a little bit out of what they had, in terms of their skill and what the Packers saw in them coming out of college. But Dad, let's just close the book on this stupid game. Any other things you want to talk about?
I have
you got
one more little thing to say because I wanted to shout out Andre Dillard.
He had a nice day.
He's at least the reports are so much better than he was the first 2 weeks of training camp. So after 2 preseason games, he is first in the league in PFF's pass blocking grade, and has given up 0 pressures in 29 pass blocking snaps.
Yeah, and he's looked really good on the left side. He has not looked as good on the right side, but he has looked quite good on the left.
But he's done I think 47 snaps to 2 or something left to right.
3, I think. Yeah,
is it
3? But it's not many. Yeah, he played 3 snaps at right tackle in the first game because it was all 3 with the starting offense when Zach Tom wasn't playing. Because it was the 3 snaps where they had Rasheed Walker in, and then they were like, all right, offense 65-yard touchdown and no more. But yeah, and then they had him at the left for the rest, and he's both better at the left than the right.
Yeah, so he's been so I'm feeling a little bit better about him being the backup tackle right now. You can't call him a swing tackle apparently.
Yeah, because he's not playing the right.
They will require a little bit of shuffling.
Yeah, and he was statistically the worst starting left tackle in the league last year.
He just needed some of that Green Bay Packers coaching magic.
Well, I was just going to say, but you can be the worst starting left tackle in the league and be a decent backup. Like, I don't know. Maybe that's what's going to go on here, hopefully. And hopefully he can, put together some of those, because he's very, naturally athletically gifted. It's just he's struggled to put it together at the NFL level. Two different stops now, but maybe third time's the charm. We'll see. Hopefully he doesn't have to play at all, but knock on wood. But these things do happen. But anyway, any last things you wanted to touch on, Dad, for the Broncos game, or should we move on?
I think that is enough. And now we'll just, delete
this chapter, that game from our memory.
Push it away. Yep.
But anyway, so let's move on to our 53-man roster predictions. Not so much to talk about who we think is going to make the team, who we think is not going to make the team. But let's talk a little bit about our takeaways from just the exercise of doing it. Now, remember, the caveat is a lot can change in a week of joint practices in a preseason game. Some players might distinguish themselves. Some players might play very poorly. There could always be injuries that affect these counts. That's why, actually making the 53-man roster and actually looking at it is, it's more of an exercise than it is actually trying to predict something. But like we said, this coming Tuesday's 53-man roster cutdown day, we'll be doing a pod afterwards to talk about that and to talk about the game against the Ravens and the practice against the Ravens. But Dad, let's talk a little bit about our takeaways from this exercise. What was your first thing that you either realized about the team, realized about what, how this roster might look? What was your first takeaway doing this 53-man roster?
So one thing that happened that I tried to avoid is every other year I'd managed to get it 50-50 offense and defense. So like 3 specialists, 25 on offense and 25 on defense. But this year I ended up with 26 defenders and 24 offensive players. So that was a little bit different. The other big takeaway I have here is I have 3 QBs on the team, but one of them is not on the roster yet. So
none of them are Sean Clifford.
None of them are Sean Clifford. Takeaway. Yes. My QB2 is listed as not on roster yet. I don't know his name.
Yeah, and
we have high hopes for blank QB2.
Yeah, and some players just to throw out there, Tannehill, maybe. Obviously,
I think
whichever
he's
one
waiting for a real starting gig. He's just going to sit there on the couch until somebody calls, like, we need a new starter. It's like,
I'm there.
He's pulling a Flacco.
Whichever one of the Browns quarterbacks ends up getting cut, they have 4 pretty capable ones on the roster. After Watson, they have Winston, DTR, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who was a rookie last year, who played some games for them. And then they have Tyler Huntley as well.
I would like to be Tyler. Yeah, Tyler Huntley would be the one I'd want from that group. If they're smart, they're going to hold on to him.
Yeah, they're going to cut Dorian Thompson-Robinson almost certainly. But if Tyler Huntley becomes available, you throw the bag at him to be your backup because he's probably the best backup in the league, honestly. The one concern I have there is you probably have to change how you run the offense.
It's a different style, which is a little bit messy if you have to run a completely different style. That's why it works so well with Baltimore.
Yeah,
they didn't have to change. It was
stylistically similar. Yeah,
similar style, so they could go without changing anything when he came in.
But sometimes having like a chaos, like I'm going to run a lot, like backup quarterback that is hard to plan for, that like you can surprise the team one time and steal a game really quick, like that. Yeah. There's some value there.
It's like bringing in a reliever who has a
knuckleballer.
Different knuckleballer. It's
like bringing in a knuckleball reliever
right after somebody's throwing 105 miles per hour. Then you bring in a knuckleballer.
Yeah, exactly. But no, so yeah, I would definitely be interested. I mean, I'm sure they'll keep an eye out because unless like they either Pratt
other options could be like Taylor Heineke.
Yeah, I think they'd actually have to trade for him though. I don't know if they're going to want to do that.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to trade him. Who else is there? Is the backup there
for the actual Falcons? Penix.
Okay, so Heineke, you think they'll
Heineke's
keep 3?
third? Yeah, probably.
You think they keep 3? Yeah, they might keep 3.
Especially
everybody keeps 3.
I know, but a lot of teams do these days. And I think, people have the one that people do say is Bailey Zappi. I don't think he's any better than Pratt or Clifford, to be honest. I don't think he's he's marginally better at best. I wouldn't feel that much better, especially considering he would come in and not know any of the offense. Bailey Zappi knowing none of the offense, I don't think he'd be better than Pratt or Clifford.
Maybe not. But I guess we'll see what happens. Hopefully it'll be like last year and Love plays all 17 games.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
And this becomes a moot point.
But yeah, so that was your first takeaway, was that you think that they're going to sign a quarterback based on just looking at that, and they'll still keep Pratt as a developmental guy, but they're going to have an actual true backup quarterback.
Yeah, so I have Pratt on the roster because I don't think he's going to make it to a practice squad.
No,
I don't think that anybody is lining up to sign Clifford because he just hasn't had a chance to do much in the league, and people thought it was a reach at the time. And I don't think
he wasn't as well thought of as a prospect as Pratt was. Pratt was a much higher regarded prospect.
Yeah, and I don't think Clifford has had a chance to prove anybody wrong for people to pick him up.
Yeah, and he had a nice preseason last year, but given his struggles in this preseason, I don't think anyone's going to be lining up out the door to make a waiver claim on him. My first takeaway, though, from building out these 53-man rosters is something we already kind of touched on when we were talking about the injury report is what is going on at running back? With both Lloyd and Dillon hurt, Lloyd with a hamstring injury where he's missed everything since the first preseason game, and he also was injured to start camp as well. And then Dillon with that stinger that, Matt LaFleur talked about they're going to try and be cautious with. Is there a chance that, Lloyd would go on PUP, which would require him to miss the first 4 games, just because I think they would be, hesitant to give him like a large role, given the fact that he's missed a big chunk of camp. He's missed over half of camp with injury. And hasn't gotten a lot of team reps. Like, would they really trust him to go out there and play with the starters right now? I don't think so. So maybe by putting him on PUP, you can work him back slowly and he could get some time to, get his head in like the game and still do some mental reps and stuff. And then for Dillon, they said they're going to be cautious. Could he be at risk of starting the season on IR and then being designated to return later? And if that happens, obviously that's a big if. Like these could be more minor injuries than they're letting on. But if that's the case, do they just go with 2 running backs and Jacobs and Wilson, and then do practice squad activations like they did 2 years ago? If you remember back to 2022, when they had before, when they had just Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon on the active roster, and then they just elevated like Patrick Taylor for a few games to have an extra emergency running back. I just wonder if that's an avenue they would explore again. And just stick with Jacobs and Wilson and then have those guys on PUP/IR, whichever they decided, and then bring them back later. I just wonder if that's going to be something that they explore. And, if so, which, running back would be the one that they would want to be elevating from the practice squad? Would it be like McCrary? Would it be Ellis Merriweather? Would it be a secret third option? So that was my first takeaway building out this roster is with both of those guys hurt. One with a very little amount of experience, one with a repeat injury that they're trying to be cautious with. Is there a chance neither of them are ready for the first few weeks of the year? And then what do they do from there?
Yeah. So I currently, I don't know if you may also I'm guessing Lloyd and Dillon start off on PUP, which we should mention for the new rules, you don't have to hold players on the 53 before putting them on the IR. And you can still get them back before the year, but you can only do that for 2 players.
For 2 players, and it counts as, even if they don't return, I believe, it still counts as a return.
Because, you have to designate them as a return when you do it. So that counts as one of your 8 returns on the season. Though you do get 2 more in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But I think they'll take advantage of that. It lets them also kind of hold other players if they think they're not actually going to be ready for the first 4 games. Lloyd, maybe he'd be ready, but will he have enough practice? Will they feel comfortable with him?
That's what I'm more worried about. Exactly.
That's the thing. I think runners can run. Good runners with good vision can go out there, see the hole, run with speed, get the outside, hit it, and run. But the question is he ready for pass pro?
Yeah, and I don't know if they're going to want to put him out there, given the fact that he's done so little in camp. He's had such little opportunity in camp to learn this stuff. And sure, he's been taking mental reps. He's been in the film room, but it's different than actually getting, reps on the field.
And I suspect they'll probably, my guess is that if that's the case, they'll only have 2 running backs on the roster, and they'll have 2 running backs on the practice squad, like McCrary and Merriweather, and call them both up because you only get 3 elevations per player from the practice squad.
And old friend Patrick Taylor is on the Niners right now, but their running back room is really deep. So maybe he ends up making a return. You never know.
Yeah, and they just had 2 players start to practice again who were hurt in
Garendo and Mitchell and Mason. All 3 of them came back.
Garendo also came back. Yeah.
So they're pretty, their roster's pretty clogged at running back, and so maybe Patrick Taylor becomes available again. So it's just something to keep an eye on because the Packers clearly have felt comfortable with him in like an case of emergency break glass, like elevation type of guy who will, be average at everything and, not cause too many problems. Except when he decides not to run out of bounds when the clock is ticking. Remember when Matt LaFleur was so mad at him? What game was it? I think it was the Lions game, the first Lions game. He didn't go out of bounds at the end of the first half. He goes upfield, gets tackled in bounds, clock running. They have to blow a timeout, and Matt LaFleur's just yelling at him on the sidelines, like, "Yep, yeah, you probably should have gone out of bounds."
But I think they do trust him. They did trust him in pass pro.
Yeah. What was your next takeaway from building out these 53s, though?
So the kind of a big picture thing. My last two roster spots on the 53 came down to a number of players. So Corey Ballantyne, Travis Glover, Luke Tenuta, Christian Welch, Joel Wilson, Tyler Davis, Benny Sapp, or Robert Rochelle. So,
you and indecision are a perfect pair because that is a lot of players just to be down to your last spot.
It takes you half an hour to order a sandwich. Yes. On the side is big thing.
I like it. I like it how I like it. Exactly. High maintenance.
High maintenance.
You're the worst kind. You think you're low maintenance, but you're actually high maintenance.
I don't see that. You don't see that. Well, that actually fits. If you're high maintenance but think you're low maintenance, of course you don't see it.
Of course.
Anyway, shall we find what's the topic again? Let's get back.
The last player on the roster.
So I went with. So this is a mix of offensive players, defensive players, and guys who do a lot of special teams. So I ended up going with Corey Ballantyne, so having 6 corners, and Tyler Davis, so one of the core special team players. And he ended up, I think, being the only core special teamer that I had on the 53.
That's interesting because I actually have something that kind of dovetails right into that. And it was what happens with the quote unquote special team only or quote unquote core special team players. Because you got guys like Zane Anderson, Christian Welch, Robert Rochelle, Benny Sapp III specifically were the 4 that I was looking at. Does a guy like Zane Anderson miss the cut because, they have invested a lot in safety? They've drafted 3 in this past year, but Zane Anderson is a staple special teamer because after drafting Bullard, Williams, and Oladapo, who I think they're high on all 3 of them, it's kind of pushing him out a little bit, but we know Bisaccia likes his guys. Is he going to still have a spot? Robert Rochelle, meanwhile, has looked like probably the best gunner that they have in terms of just in the preseason games, which, small sample size, but he's looked like their best gunner. But he's fighting for a roster spot with 7th rounder Kalen King, who has a much higher ceiling just as an overall player. What happens there?
And who was looking good until that game against the Broncos.
Yeah, but everyone looked bad in that game, to be fair. But yeah, he had 2 bad missed tackles in that one. And then at linebacker, they drafted 2 guys in Edgerrin Cooper and Tyron Hopper, and they seem high on McDuffie and Wilson. Does Christian Welch have a spot? I mean, he looked pretty good in that. He's one of the few players who actually looked pretty decent in that Broncos game, but I'm just like you were saying, what's happening with those special teams only players and their competition against guys who have higher ceilings, but maybe aren't going to, wouldn't be contributing as much directly this year.
Yeah, and so it came down to me thinking about both special teams and what else they do. So Davis became my 4th tight end behind Musgrave, Kraft, and Sims, or should I say Kraft, Musgrave, and Sims. And while Welch has looked good as a linebacker in the preseason, that he could actually hold up for some plays, he would be the 6th linebacker.
Yeah, the 6th linebacker. Which I do want to say, Brian Gutekunst did mention that he thought that they would have to keep more linebackers than usual with this new scheme. So I think having 6 linebackers, although different from what they've done in the past, is more on the table now than it was then.
Yeah, so I came down to which position I wanted to have a 6th player in: corner, linebacker, or safety. And I went with corner because of the other corners I wanted to keep. Basically Ballantyne and King, having both of them on instead of having, say, Sapp or Rochelle or Welch on there.
Yeah, and so I think it's something to keep an eye on because I would rather keep the more high upside players and just be like, hey, can you learn special teams? But Because at the same, like, we had all these special teams only players last year, and it's not like our special teams was any good. So, like, what are we really getting from out of that?
Tyler Davis.
Yeah.
Help me.
Our right hand on special. Our right hand on special
Tyler
teams.
Davis. You're my only hope.
Apparently, you just can't have a good special teams if you don't have Tyler Davis. I mean,
now that we're
possibly
in this
be
year,
expected to have a good special teams, Dad. They didn't have Tyler Davis. What do you want him to do?
Well, now that we're in this year and no longer in last year, I'm hoping that's true.
I mean, he's hurt now again, though. Yeah. So, but that was can we talk about, that was such a ridiculous argument. It's like, well, we didn't have Tyler Davis, so of course our special teams wasn't going to be good. What do you mean? Like, what does that even mean?
He is like the QB1 of special teams units.
I get that he's on every unit, and he is probably your best special teamer, but like, what happens if he misses? Like, he's not going to play every game. He's been hurt two seasons in a row. Like, what happens if he misses 6 games? Just like you do in a normal season, is your special teams just going to fall apart again? Like, that can't happen. I don't understand this. Like, oh, our special teams was bad because we didn't have Tyler Davis. What?
Yeah, and I'm not quite sure with the special teams. So some things can be so different. Like the whole kickoff is just a completely different thing, and maybe it's not really. It's hard to tell what effect
if it's really going to matter. Yeah,
if it's going to matter, and how often can you do anything? It's either because everybody's lined up evenly spaced because there's no more running downfield and finding lanes, and it's because you're spread out across the field from one sideline to the other. It's easier to make those tackles there, and if they get through there, then it's just up to the kicker.
Yeah, and I'm sorry if that.
So it doesn't matter what everybody else is doing.
I'm sorry if that stretch sounded like I was disparaging Tyler Davis. I it's not about him. It's about frustration with all this investment into the special teams just for a lack of return at special teams and to still have a really bad special teams. It's just frustrating because it's like, it just feels like a lot of excuse making has gone on the special teams front, despite a lot of investment there, is how I feel about it. And it can be frustrating as a fan, which, it's not about Tyler Davis. Tyler Davis, he seems like a good teammate, good locker room guy. He is a good special teamer, but I just think that if your special teams is contingent on just one guy playing, then what are we really doing here?
You'd think we get more return on our coaching
on the investment. Exactly. Yeah. But anyway, I had anything else you wanted to touch on there, or?
That kind of covered the special team aspects, and where I came down with basically only keeping one of those. Zane Anderson, I didn't even end up with on my practice squad. Now the others, Welch, Sapp, and Rochelle, all ended up on my practice squad. Now Zane Anderson fell into the bucket of you can only have 6 players with a certain number of accrued seasons.
Yeah,
and otherwise they've got to have 0 or less than half a season.
Yeah, and the thing is, they could snake some of these special team only players onto the practice squad, but you only get 3 elevations. So, if you want them to be able to participate all the time, you need them on the 53.
Yeah, but sometimes things
happen. It's true.
Things happen. Players get elevated for the rest of the season all the time.
Yeah, that's true. My next takeaway, though, from doing this 53-man roster is Malik Heath versus Grant DuBose, or both. Do the Packers go 7 receivers and keep both of them, which I think is less likely, or do they go 6? If so, which of the 2 do they go? I'm leaning Malik Heath right now. It sounds like you're leaning DuBose. DuBose, I think after the first preseason game, I was like, oh, definitely DuBose. He's at a way better camp. And then he had those 2 drops against Denver, which I know you shouldn't be swinging your decisions just based on the outcomes of one game. How many
players would we have to cut based on that game?
That's a good point. But I just think the fact that Malik Heath showed you something in actual NFL games last year, I'm leaning him right now. But I know that you're leaning DuBose. So do you want to make the case for DuBose?
Well, I'm on Team DuBose because he's shown more receiving upside, I think. And so a lot of what Heath is, hanging his hat on is willingness to do a lot of the dirty work. Catch over the middle, make blocks. And DuBose has been getting a lot of shout-outs from LaFleur for his blocking ability and what he's been doing so far in this training camp as a blockers, as well as what we can see him doing as a receiver.
And despite him having those 2 drops against Denver, he did make a really nice play as a gunner. He had a nice tackle on punt team. So he at least did that.
So could be another one of your, sixth receiver who's also a core special teamer.
Yeah. And so I could see the argument both ways. I just think that, and they could probably get either one of them to the practice squad, depending on who else they keep. Heath would have to be one of your 6 exceptions. But
yes, because he played enough last year where now he's one of the 6 exceptions, and so that's another reason why I ended up bumping
DeBose. Yeah,
Zane Anderson, and so DeBose would not because he didn't play last year.
Yeah, he was active for like 2 games or something. Yeah.
Yeah,
he was elevated and then not activated. It was like a weird thing that,
right.
Yeah.
You could be on the game day roster for, I think, up to 8 games in one season.
Yeah, it's
not count.
Yeah. I see the argument both ways, but that was just something that I was keeping my eye on, and I don't think it's like a deal breaker either way, but it was definitely something while I was doing those 53-man rosters that was something I thought about. Though
I also think that DuBose is less likely to make it to the practice squad, though.
See, I feel the opposite.
Maybe they both are.
I think Heath showed enough at the NFL level where I don't know. I think he'd be less likely to make it to the practice squad than DeBose would, because DeBose made it last year, and he hasn't. It's not like he's done anything since then where it's like, he had the one preseason game, but
yeah, it kind of depends on how many ears to the ground the other teams have for training camps,
and that's the thing. Everyone's always afraid that they're gonna get a guy poached while they're trying to get him to the practice squad. It happens almost never.
There's less than 1 per team per year.
Yeah, it almost never happens
on average, and it's been a number of years since the Packers have had somebody poached, so it's unlikely to happen.
Yeah,
it does get fretted over a lot more than is necessary.
Yeah. Do you have any more takeaways? I think I had one more.
My main thing is I could go over sort of how my whole roster ended up constructed, where I went with this was a hard decision. I had to go with 10 offensive linemen or 9, and it ended up with 9 in the end because I feel like we can get some players on the practice squad for the beginning of the season. I don't think anybody's going to poach Glover or Caleb Jones.
And the thing is, these 10th, 11th guys, they haven't looked amazing in camp, so it's
yeah. And so I think they can get them on. If they're on the 53 as a 10th offensive lineman, they're not going to be playing much anyway.
Hopefully, knock on wood. I mean, if they are, something has gone horribly wrong.
Well, you wouldn't have them all active on game day anyway, so then you couldn't bring them in the middle of the game. And if you needed the next game, well, then you can elevate somebody. And we figure that seems like Glover is on a developmental track.
Yeah, he's probably more of a red shirt guy. He's probably going to take
not yet
take
ready.
A year.
And so I ended up going with 9, which was that I have five. No, I only ended up with 4 tackles. That's something that's a little weird. I only had four tackles: Dillard, Tom, Walker, and Telfort. Though you could have Morgan or Jenkins.
Yeah, swing out there if need be.
Swing out there if you need to, and just 5 interior offensive linemen. Though, you say two hybrids.
Yeah, I think I kept 10 in the end. I think my only difference is I kept Glover on the 53, just because I think there's a chance he gets snagged if you put him in practice squad. He was a 6th round pick. It's not like he was the very end of the 7th round, but I don't think there's a huge chance that he would get snagged though.
Yeah, so that would be, I'd have to do a little bit of finagling to figure out, because he wouldn't count. If you end up deciding that you would need Glover on the 53 instead of the practice squad, then you'd have to change who you're putting on the practice squad, because my practice squad is already maxed out for the 6 players who have the exemptions with more accrued seasons. Well, yours somehow has all kinds of room.
What can I say? I'm just good at constructing these rosters.
I'm just trying to get as much as I can.
But anyway, my final takeaway from doing this exercise was 3 or 4 tight ends. 1, will Tyler Davis be healthy / make the team? The coaching staff seems very high on him. A lot higher than the general public. And he's, a very good special teams player, but, he's currently dealing with a shoulder injury and he was out all last year injured. So that's never ideal. Is he going to be an IR pup guy? Is he going to be back sooner from that shoulder injury? We don't really know the severity of it. And if he's available, do they keep 4 and keep Ben Sims, who I'm higher on, I think, just as a player? I think he's actually one of the obviously, it sounds silly, but he's one of the better tight end threes in the league. I think he has the talent and he could grow into a good tight end 2, maybe even like a low end tight end 1 for a team, just given his athletic ability, his size at the position. He's a pretty decent blocker already. And so I just wonder if Tyler Davis's special teams ability really outweighs the upside of Sims. I don't personally think it does, but I wonder what they're going to decide. Or is Davis injured and he's not going to make it? So that was one thing I was looking at as well.
Yeah, and I have both. I have Sims on the team. I have been tempted to put Joel Wilson on my 53.
I'd be more tempted to put Henry Pearson.
I haven't seen him. Wilson looked really good in that first preseason game.
Yeah. He looks solid.
And Pearson I just haven't seen enough of.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends if they want someone. I think, Pearson, his versatility is more than these other guys in terms of, like, he is more of a traditional fullback H-back than an actual tight end. And so he'd be able to do a little bit more backfield stuff, a little bit more I formation stuff. So that's just the only thought I had there. Because he's really more of a fullback than he is a tight end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In terms of who would you say is your player on your practice squad who you'd say is most likely to be on the 53?
Of the players on my practice squad, I would say the one most likely is Grant DeBose. Just because, it seems like him and Malik Heath's a bit of a toss-up. The next one, though, is maybe Sean Clifford, just in case they decide to keep all 3 of these guys, which they might do. And then I could also see a scenario where they keep, Keyshawn Banks was elevated for that game against the Niners, and Brenton Cox was not. So I know he's been injured most of camp, but they seem to like him as a 5th edge, and he was ahead of Cox last year when they needed reps. And then Aaron Mosby's had a nice camp, but I don't think they're as likely as those other 2 guys. What about you?
Yeah, for me, besides having Heath instead of DeBose, I might say Benny Sapp.
Yeah,
would be my next.
He's had a pretty good camp.
Who I'd think has the next best chance of making it onto the 53 rather than practice squad. And if for some reason Davis is hurt as well, if you have like 3 players who are hurt at the beginning of the year, then maybe go Sapp. Though then you end up with like 27 defenders to 23 offensive players. Maybe you end up with Travis Glover.
Yeah, I think a 10th lineman
or 10th lineman or possibly a 7th wide receiver. Though I don't expect him to go 7th wide receiver.
Yeah, I don't necessarily either.
And for example, I don't think I think Samori Toure is going to be playing somewhere else.
I think he might be on the practice squad.
He could be.
He's one of my practice squad exceptions.
Is he one of your practice squad exemptions?
Yeah. So I guess we'll see. But anyway, in a week's time, we will know. And in a week's time, we'll be here talking to you about our takeaways from the actual 53-man roster.
As takeaways from the Ravens and the Packers.
Yes, preseason game, and practice.
I want to see. I just a little quick. We're jumping something that's not even on the outline. What I want to see from this last preseason game, I hope to see some run blocking.
Some better run blocking.
We've had two games so far, and the run blocking has been bad.
Yeah, it hasn't been good. It has not been good. It's fair to say.
And I want to see some better run blocking. I don't know if we'll see the ones.
No, I hope we don't. But we'll see. Malaflow said maybe.
Maybe the reports from the joint practice will be that the Packers have just been dominating.
We'll see.
If that happens, then if it's another bad joint practice, for the Packers, then I think they're going to be playing in the game.
Yeah, we'll see. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. Like we said, we'll be back next week talking about the 53-man roster. And then after that, we'll be up to 2 a week, Dad. We'll be doing preseason and postseason pods for every single game.
Start stretching.
I was going to say, be ready.
Pull a hammy doing two a week.
Like we said earlier, give us a follow at FatherSonPacker on Twitter. Subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. And also just to finish up here, just wanted to shout out, Hey, We Like Your Pod, because Dad, you made an awesome appearance there this week. If anyone wants to go check it out, Hey, We Like Your Pod, great friends of this podcast, have had both of us on now. Dad, you were a guest on the last one. So go check out my dad on that podcast. It was a very fun time. I listened to it. He goes on a few rants that are maybe a little long.
Rants, maybe. Let's just call them a diversion.
Not rants. Yeah, rant's the wrong word. More of of a diversion, a bit of a monologue. But anyway,
it was my dog. You caught me monologuing.
But yeah, if you want to just shout out Matt and Don really quick, you guys look like you had a great time, right?
Yeah, I meant to say that at the beginning of the podcast, but since we restarted it a couple times, like, okay, I've totally lost the thread on that. So, but yeah, I had a great time with Matt and Don. It was a lot of fun to do that podcast.
Yeah, and just shout out to them, for keeping the Packers community so close-knit, for having us on. We really appreciate it. Go check out their pod. Once again, it's Hey We Like Your Pod. They're on every platform as well. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. Go check them out. Go check us out on all the podcast platforms. And until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.